Welcome to this afternoon's panel. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here, and I wanted to thank especially Robert Templar and Suzanne Lane for organizing this conference. It's been extraordinarily enlightening thus far. Today's afternoon panel is entitled War on Film. I'm Lisa Wedeen from the University of Chicago, and I'm the moderator of a panel that includes Charlotte Eagar, the Queens of Syria, Dirar, Khattab, the Death of Aleppo, AlHakam Shaar, and Nicole Tung, 7 Days in Syria. So hopefully most of you have seen the films that were aired here on June 4th, but maybe some of you did not. Our panelists want to do two things. Some of them want to have opening remarks for a few moments, and some do not. So we're going to play a little bit with the form and allow those who would like to speak first to do so. I do have several questions to pose to the audience as well, but we'll start with the two folks who would like to say something to introduce their work. Charlotte Eagar and then AlHakam Shaar both want to take a few minutes. Charlotte?
Okay. Here we go. Thank you very much all for coming here. Can I just check, who saw Queens of Syria on Saturday night? Would anybody like to watch a 3-minute trailer of it now? Okay, we've got it here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, if you turn off the lights, I think it might be a little easier.
If it doesn't work, then we can stop.
انظري إلي وستجدين مأساة تمشي على ساقين. كنت أيتها الأم زوجة قائد عظيم. زوجته عيد؟
يلا عيد.
وأنا صغيرة الحلم إني مثل. كنت ماني مصدقة إن الحلم اللي كان من أنا صغيرة إنه هلا رح يتحقق، لأن أنا بحكي عن بلدي وماني حابة أطلع بهالصورة هاي كنت.
فيعيش حاضرا مؤلما وروحه تحن إلى سعادة ماضية. يعني هذا المقطع أكثر شيء ببكي. نحن تركنا بلدتنا الأساسية، صار كثير القصف، صرت بدي أدور حياة أفضل لأولادي. النص بحكي عن شيء حقيقي عنا، مع إنه هو قديم بس التاريخ عم يعيد نفسه. بالنسبة لهيجابي كثير أنا حسيتها قريبة، يعني هي زوجة ملك طروادة، فقدت كل ما تملك يعني من عائلتها لأحفادها، مثل ما نحن يعني كانت عايشة ملكة ببيتها. ما قالت أنا كنت دير الملك وحركه كمكوك، يعني هلا شو؟ ونحن هيك صفينا يعني.
الهدف من هذا الشغل كله على بعضه انه نقدر كلياتنا مع بعض نوصل لنتيجه نقدر نساوي شغله بغض النظر عن انتماءاتنا ومواقفنا السياسي. ما بتقدر الناس بسوريا تعمل شغله كلياتها مع بعضها، وما عندها حل غير انه تعمل مع بعضها، ما في حل ثاني.
أنا التي يتوجب عليها أن تقوم بواجبات الجنائزية.
اجتمعنا بأخواتنا السوريات وكل وحدة عم تتعرف على حياة الثاني.
والله إلينا تسندي.
لا البيت بيتنا، لا المكان مكاننا، لا البلد بلدنا.
الشعب بلش المشروع دخل شيء جديد عندنا بحياتنا.
إحساسي إنه في عندي صرخة وبدي أصرخها، بدي العالم كله يسمعها. يا ترى في نتيجة؟
وما لم تعد الآن إلا ركاما من الخراب ودخان الحرارة.
Thank you. I hope you managed to get enough out of that. Before I start talking about Queens of Syria, I'm going to very quickly read you a short paragraph I wrote in a novel about Sarajevo, where I lived for some years as a foreign correspondent during the war. And this is a verbatim conversation I had with a theatre director, who I then turned into a character in the novel, at a party in Sarajevo. And he's a theatre director turned army major. And he says, sometimes I'm on the front line. And then he grinned at me and he said, it's just the same, you know. It's just directing. Now I direct my men in war, but it's real. He started talking about special effects, about blood, and how you could never get it right on film. About how the real thing, war, was so much greater, but also in many ways so much more banal. So if you did get it right, it would all be wrong. War is boring, he said, and he took another cigarette. So much of war is boring. Now, for the refugees that you saw in that film and the refugees we've been working with, they were dealing with a very, very, very boring part of war, which is when you've had to flee your home, your house has been destroyed, your family has been killed, you've gone into exile, and you are alone in a foreign land, and you are miserable, you're depressed, you're in exile, you don't know who you are anymore, and you have nothing to do. And this film is it's quite unusual for a film because it didn't start off as a film, and that's not what we wanted to make. We didn't want to make a documentary. It started as a therapeutic drama project to help Syrian refugees come to terms with their exile and to help them psychologically. And so we ran this project, as you can see from that, for 6 weeks in Jordan. And the 60 women who volunteered to take part, none of them had ever acted before. Now, Euripides, Trojan Women, we chose because it's the perfect film to do for refugees. It's about refugees. It's set at the fall of Troy. The men are all dead, and the women are standing around in a refugee camp, waiting to hear their fate, and they're going to be taken off as captives by the Greeks, who are the victors. So the women workshopped their own stories into the play, and they performed it after 6 weeks at Amman's National Centre for Culture and Arts. And the result was so extraordinarily good, I must admit, very much to our surprise, that it has been invited to tour the UK this July, and with our original Syrian cast, they've got their visas, and we've got an incredibly high-profile tour happening. So that is the thinking behind the film. Now, I don't know what you guys who saw it thought, but we were really amazed that the documentary was as good as it was. As I said, it wasn't the point of the exercise. And when we initially started, it was to help the Syrian refugees. So my husband and co-producer, William Sterling, who's over there with the moustache, which he grew in order to work effectively in the Middle East. It's a vital man management tool. We're filmmakers and journalists. I've been a foreign correspondent for about 25 years now, and Willie and I also write film scripts, and we made a few years ago a very short romantic comedy which won large prizes all over the world and got into Cannes, and we were waiting to become rich and famous, and it never happened. And so while we were waiting, Marks and Spencer's hired us to go to Africa and do some training films with their vegetable packers, who are a group of slum kids in Africa, in Nairobi. And we thought, well, this is a bit boring, this training film, so we'll turn it into a soap opera. So we turned it into a soap opera, and we got the kids to put their own stories into the scripts, and we workshopped the scripts with the kids for 10 days, and then we shot it on location in Dandora, which was the slum they all lived in, which is the largest rubbish dump in Africa. And they played these characters in the film that were essentially themselves. And we were absolutely staggered by the changes that we saw in these people. They became much more self-confident. They were working incredibly effectively as a group. They had new friends. They had a new sense of identity. They got new opportunities. Some of them were offered scholarships to film schools as a result of it. They got money, great. And also the other thing we were struck by, artistically, as filmmakers, was that the performances they gave were incredibly strong artistically, because basically they were playing themselves. So that film has now been seen by 750,000 people in Africa. Marks and Spencer's show it to their workforces, and apparently productivity has gone up by about 70%, so it's obviously doing something right, which is what they cared about. But we then thought, well, let's try this again. So we rang up Oxfam, who I do quite a lot of work with journalistically, and said, do you have any similar projects you would like us to do? And they said, oh, we wish you could think of something for our Syrian refugees. And we immediately thought of the Trojan Women because we both studied it at university. We're both classicists. And as I said before, it's a play about refugees. And my first summer in Bosnia, which was 92, I went straight from university, and I spent all that summer talking to refugees. And in October, I was back in my kitchen in Kiev, not that far from here, quite bored and lonely, and I listened to a production of the Trojan women on the World Service. And to my amazement, the stories were exactly the same. Nothing had changed. It was murder, rape, loss, exile. Everything was the same. And essentially, war doesn't change. You know, the stories are eternal, the weapons change, that's it. So this is the one we thought we'd do. As most people know, some people here may know, others can imagine, refugees tend to be very lonely, very isolated and depressed. If you go into exile, you've lost a great deal of your sense of self. You also, particularly if you're living in Jordan, you're not allowed to work legally. So you have a lot of time on your hands, and you need to meet people. So in fact, you're absolutely perfect fodder for any kind of community group, and a drama group is a very good one to choose. But we didn't just want to do as we'd done in Africa, work with individuals and cheer them up a bit. And we also thought we wanted to make the world sit up and notice the horrors of the Syrian refugee crisis. And it's hard to remember now, when the Syrian refugee crisis dominates the European agenda, that frankly 3 years ago nobody cared. And there were sort of 10 million people who'd been displaced inside and outside Syria, and the world really didn't care at all. So this is obviously sort of deeply wrong. So we thought, well, if we could, as a journalist, I know perfectly well that Syrian refugee has terrible life isn't news. But Syrian refugee puts on a Greek tragedy. That is actually news. You can get that on CNN, and we did. You know, you can get that on the BBC, you get it on Sky. So you can actually help to make an impact. You can educate other people. Now, initially, we were going to shoot it as a film, as we did in Africa. Very, very low budget, with a kind of camera and a tub of hummus or something. But then we thought, well, the trouble with a film is you scatter stardust, and then you leave. And we never went back to the children, the kids in Africa, and I always feel a bit guilty about that. But we thought, if we do a play, then the guys own it. It's theirs. They can do it again. And in fact, they are now going to London, and they're going to do it in the Young Vic for a week, and it's sold out. And then they're going on a UK tour, and they've got a gala night in the West End, sponsored by Andrew Lloyd Webber. So you can't do it again. So we thought, well, that's how we're going to do it. We'll do a play. And then, well, we thought, well, the trouble with a play, though, is that you only actually get as many people who come and see the play. And, you know, that's probably a couple of hundred people if you're lucky. So if we make a documentary about it, then the documentary can go on television, and that will be a way to publicise the Syrian refugee crisis. And also, the idea of the documentary was to hedge the project as well, because documentaries thrive on disaster and problems. And the play could have been a complete disaster. In fact, it wasn't, but it could have been. And I had this vision of a voice in my head saying, William has never directed a play before and does not speak Arabic. So that was the point of the documentary. We also thought that it might help finance the project as well if it was successful, because we'd get money for selling it and putting it on television. And we still have not, incidentally, given up the idea of doing a feature film, but the feature film has got very grand, and it's now got a sort of £2 million budget, and it's got a director, and it's got a star who's called Him Abbas, who's a sort of Meryl Streep of the Arab world. So, but that's sort of gone off into a stratosphere on its own. But the play and the documentary are manageable. So we had to raise the money, which we did through a process, essentially of emotional blackmail. We gave a party, invited our friends to it. And then we had to find the people. So we went to Jordan, and we went down around refugee centres, and we went to the UNHCR food queue, asking people if they'd want to be in this play. And we hired a psychologist who would come in, a Syrian psychologist, who would come in once a week and talk to the women. And we also set up a childcare facility for the children, women's children, because I realised that you can't get, Arab housewives don't move without their kids. So, but the kids also don't let the Arab housewives concentrate on what they'd rather be doing, which is Euripides. So we set up a childcare centre for the children. And then we sat there and waited to see if anybody would turn up, which we didn't know. And we were quite concerned, actually. I thought, my God, are we going to have to give all the money back? But luckily they did. And we had, I think, 12 on the first day, 18 on the second. By the third day, we had 36. And by day 4, we had to close it at 50 because we didn't have the budget for more. Now, quite a lot of those women turned up to kind of drink coffee and have biscuits. But in the end, that was for themselves a very important psychological thing for them to be able to do, just to get out of their houses, to stop being alone, to come in, to have an occupation. And we ended up with 25 of them on stage. Now, when we first started working with these women, they were very, very nervous and depressed like this. They arrived clutching their handbags and children, which is essentially all they'd left Syria carrying. And then Omar, our director, who's a very grand Syrian director, he's sort of won loads of awards and has been at the Kennedy Center in the US and various places. He started workshopping with the women, and they put their own stories into the play, and he had them drawing timelines showing how many houses they'd had to move to on the journey from Syria. And then they shared with the group the stories of the people that they'd lost. And they acted out scenarios as well, you know. So you go into the room and you see one woman standing like that, so 3 others on the floor. And they found, as we thought they would, remarkable parallels between their own experiences and Euripides' play. And the children, we watched the children as well, and at the start what the word is, I think, in sort of correct development workers speak, is not socialized. And some of them were 3 or 4 years old. They hadn't really met anybody outside the home because they were living such isolated lives. And so I remember the first day, we got all these toys for them, and they just dismembered them all. It was like a kind of pink plastic war zone everywhere, these sort of Barbie's heads. But by the end of 6 weeks, the children were playing very, very nicely together, and we had a psychologist who came in and did play therapy with them. And so they've become a very nice, close-knit group of children now. They're all still friends now. Anyway, the transformation of these women was completely extraordinary, and after 6 weeks, they had become busy, self-important career women, and, you know, they self-confidence, and the night before the opening night, they went on strike. They demanded more money, which in one way was a nightmare for the budget, but in another way was simply marvellous, because it showed what self-worth they had developed over the previous 6 weeks. So we had a bit of a harangue, and we got down to a figure that was manageable, but they knew there was no play without them. I'm slightly hoping they don't do that at the Young Vic, but they are being quite well paid when they're over in the UK. They're being paid the same as a British actor would be, so there we go. But they were also polished performers, and they had created a work of art that has international resonance. And this is the thing that I was saying earlier. If you choose a play that your workshop participants can identify with, then the reality, the truth of their own experience shines through. And that's best for their psychological well-being, but it's also absolutely key for the advocacy element of this project. Because if something is artistically brilliant, then people will want to see it. And as I said, we have a gala night in the West End, sponsored by Andrew Lloyd Webber. After that, the women then return to Jordan this summer and do another run in Jordan. Now, since then, we've done a couple more projects with them. We did a radio soap opera set in a Syrian refugee camp last year in Arabic and then in English, which went out on the BBC World Service and also on BBC Radio 4. And then last summer, we did Oliver, the musical. We commissioned Oliver in Arabic, set it in a modern Arab city, and it was backed by Cameron McIntosh, who's a British impresario. And we had the junior cast for Syrian refugee children. And and even as we speak, the women are rehearsing at the moment. So I think we've been very lucky to work with them. And drama therapy is said to give people new opportunities and the confidence to change their lives. And I think we're lucky enough to work with these women who are grabbing both those opportunities with both hands.
Thank you very much. AlHakam.
Thank you. Unlike the other panelists here, I'm not a filmmaker myself, so I'd like to have, hopefully, 5 minutes talking about film and the Syrian revolution conflict from the observer's perspective. I was in Syria for the first 13 months of the revolution. I was still there. When you talk about film and Syria now, for the outside world or even those still in Syria, if the question is how can I learn about what's going on, we should remember a very important form of film, which is the citizen journalist YouTube film. Now, YouTube was banned in Syria. Still, people used VPN and other means, and there was also this Chinese product, little file that you have to update every 2 weeks, so that allows you to open blocked websites. It was really for quite a long time these people with probably hundreds of videos every week documenting the protests. These were very short, often 2 minutes. They served a very, it was used as a tool. It's not just an expressive tool, but it was there to say we are here. people, those who showed these films used to say the date, the place, and what's happening here. And when that's not enough, because often it was a war, a media war as well. There were always people who said, oh no, this is fabricated. Oh no, like you're bringing a video from a different country. This is from Libya. No, this is not from Syria. This is from Egypt. So people also brought, like on paper also, they wrote the date, the place, and they read that too, and they described what's happening. Protest in Saqba, 9/5/2013, for example. Police shooting at people. Secret Shabiha are attacking the protesters, unarmed protesters. Now, the mass media, for several reasons, Syria being a closed-in country by the authorities, was late to pick up on it. It's not that it didn't want to, but it couldn't, probably. But there were also parts when you would feel the frustration as an observer. You could see these videos on YouTube, but you don't see any mention of them in the media. I remember very well Al Jazeera picking up quite late on them, like about 2 to 3 months. And only gradually they started to insert some news about Syria at the end of the news bulletin. Only to later at some point realize, oh no, we need to, this is something to invest in, probably. This is going to happen. This is a true revolution then. And we've decided probably, it's officially, Al Jazeera is officially affiliated with some of the emirs in Qatar. And so they decided to cover what's happening. There was a bit of development from that with the promos, in Arabic bromo also, or promo. Some 3 to 5 minute productions, just like the one that I think Lisa was screening here, but it's coming later. It's a sort of artist activists. Some is still in Syria, some abroad, trying to support what's going on. And this, for the first time, we started to see some influence here. So it could be someone who, whose life is not at risk. I have my sister, my brother-in-law, and even their kid. They live in Munich. They took part in producing a film where that was late 2011. They said, my name's blah, 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 and of course you see their face because they're not at risk. Even though the family was pissed because this could endanger them, and they say, I want freedom for my country, I want democracy for my country. So for the first time you wouldn't know, like, is this, is it fully reflective of the views of those on the ground? I think that was important, but it was for the first time worth checking to what extent this is the grassroots thing from people inside Syria. It was also at a somewhat later stage that we started to see some documentaries. So maybe after 10 to 12 months of the start of the revolution, we started to see mass scale. We were having a discussion with Dirar about that, and he has also some justification about the role of these documentaries and why they couldn't be produced earlier on. Why was it only some 1 year later that we have moved from the short 2-minute to 5-minute film to the full-length documentary? Of course, there's a lot to say, but I would like to leave it to the debate part. Thank you.
In media cultures that have us increasingly reliant on motion picture narratives for our sense of historical reality, it may be incumbent on contemporary scholarship to cultivate the requisite analytic skills for making sense of what we see. Documentary filmmaking has become more visible than ever, and fiction filmmaking has increasingly turned to work purportedly based on actual or true or historical events to lend the film dramatic gravitas. The use of cell phones, as we just heard, to record events on the ground, moreover, has democratized cinema, making every phone-wielding citizen a potential documentary filmmaker and/or journalist. My first question to the panel is as follows. In part, this session will consider what Roland Barthes once called the reality effect in the case of films that claim to be making serious historical representations. How do you see your relationship to the material you represent? In other words, what relationship to the real do you imagine cultivating? Are you registering what exists? Is such a practice even possible? Is it desirable? How does your vision of reality affect the way you film? What sorts of realities do you imagine your films are helping to construct? If anybody wants to take up that question, I'll ask a related one and then give it over to you guys for a bit. My second question, relatedly, is beyond consideration of cinema's reality effect or effects, I also want to ask how you as filmmakers construct your object of study in a variety of stylistic registers and the implications of these stylistic choices on the material you present. So my second question has to do with the stylistic choices you make. Camera angles, the objects you took to be worthy of study, the omissions or material you didn't film, and how they impact the political significance or messages of your film.
First, thank you all for coming. فينا نجاوب على السؤال الأول. هلا بالبداية حابب أحكي عن الصحفي بشكل عام بسوريا وفينا نقول كمان صانع الأفلام. يعني من بداية الثورة في سوريا قبل 2011 الصحفيين عموما يلي حاولوا ينقلوا الحقيقة اللي عم بتصير في سوريا وجدوا نفسهم فجأة في مواجهة مع النظام من دون أي حراك منهم يعني تجاه النظام لمجرد أنهم هن عم بيحاولوا ينقلوا الحقيقة اللي عم بتصير في سوريا. مجرد نقل الحقيقة اللي عم بتصير كانت في سوريا، المظاهرات السلمية والاحتجاجات والأصوات اللي ارتفعت ضد النظام الاستبدادي في سوريا كان هو بالنسبة له النظام جريمة بتبرر له أنه يعتقل وأنه يهين وأنه يقتل الصحفي. بالتأكيد يعني بنسبة
خليه يترجم شوية.
So I'll do the interpretation to what Dirar is going to say. And first of all, he said that I'd like to mention the role journalists in general found themselves in at the beginning of the Syrian revolution, because their main objective, their main goal was to portray reality and bring it to life and get people to know what is happening in the country. But by doing that, the place they found themselves in was completely confrontational with the government, because basically they were considered to be doing a crime. So they were arrested, they were humiliated, they were like detained for like no specific time, no specific reason, and so on and so forth.
وبالتالي اوتوماتيكيا بالتالي بشكل تلقائي صارت الثورة السورية ومجابهة النظام الاستبدادي بشكل تلقائي صارت هي قضية أي صحفي حر في سوريا، لأنه صفى النظام بغير إرادتي أنا كصحفي، النظام صفى عدوي. وبصراحة هي النقطة بالذات هي كانت الأكبر أكثر شيء ممكن يكون صعب بالنسبة للصحفي لما بده يحاول هو ينقل صورة اللي عم بيصير في سوريا بالنسبة للناس. الناس راح تعتبر لما الصحفي بده ينقل صورة الثورة، الناس راح تعتبر إنه هو منحاز منحاز إلى قضية أو منحاز إلى، لكن في الحقيقة هن ما بيعرفوا إنه بالفعل في بسوريا صحفيين عم بينقتلوا لأنهم عم بينقلوا الحقيقة، والحقيقة هي إنه كان في ثورة.
Okay, so eventually the relationship between any free journalist in Syria and the dictatorship, the Syrian regime, was right away an enemy and counterpart of the enemy kind of relationship. Why? Because what they tried to do, the journalists, were to tell people that just because you are trying to tell the truth, you are being assassinated by this dictatorship. So the main thing they were doing basically was to spread the message, which is what is happening in Syria is a revolution. It's nothing else. But the price for this very simple message, to transfer the message of people asking for freedom, was death for most of them.
لكن بعد ما كثرت بعد ما تحولت بعد ما انقلبت الثورة لصراع، صار في صراع في سوريا مسلح بين عشرات الأطراف الموجودة على الأرض. يمكن صارت مهمة الصحفي أو صانع الأفلام أصعب بكتير من الوضع قبل لما كان في طرفين. لكن بنفس الوقت صار في للأسف الحدود اللي صارت بين المناطق السورية اللي في مناطق تحت سيطرة النظام ومناطق تحت سيطرة المعارضة. هذا شيء مؤسف، بس هو من جهة تانية عطى مجال للصحفي أنه يتحرك بحرية أكثر ضمن المناطق. أنا بالنسبة لي عم بحكي طبعا، أنا كان عندي الحرية التامة أنه أتحرك في المناطق اللي خاضعة لسيطرة المعارضة. بس كمان برجع بقول المشكلة اللي كنت عم لاقيها أنه أنا عم بصور حياة الناس اللي هن أبناء الثورة، وأنا قضيتي هي الثورة. أنا كيف دائما أنا كان الهاجس تبعي اللي عم بفكر فيه دائما كيف بدي أقدر شوف بعين الناس اللي برا اللي هن ما بيعرفوا شيء، في حين أنا ابن الثورة وابن هالمنطقة وابن هدول الناس اللي عم حاول انقل معاناتهم. فكتير صعب انه انا شوف بعين المحايد الشخص اللي برا، وبنفس الوقت كون انا المادة، يعني الناس اللي عم بصورهم وعم بشتغل معهم وعم بيكونوا هن مادة الفيلم، انا منهم وانا فيهم. فهاي النقطة يمكن كانت من أصعب القصص اللي أنا كنت عم بحاول دائما مع الأصدقاء اللي اشتغلنا بالفيلم. إذا بدي أحكي بس عن فيلم Death of Aleppo، من أصعب القصص اللي كنا دائما عم نحاول إلى أبعد الحدود إنه نتفادى نوقع فيها نحن كأبناء ثورة، نتفادى إنه نتعاطف مع الشخص اللي قدامنا أو نحاول نأثر عليه بطريقة أو بأخرى، لحتى بالأخير توصل صورة فعليا هي قضيتنا بالصورة الصحيحة اللي الناس بدها توصلها، بعيدا عن تأثيرنا نحن كصناع لهي المادة.
Okay. A little bit long. Okay, so in later stages, when the revolution in Syria took the shape of armed conflict, and unfortunately there were lots of different conflicting parties, so it changed from having two opponents, the government and the rebels. It became very complicated. Dirar had the ability to move easily in the areas which was not under the control of the government, and here comes the main important point for him in creating his own movie, The Death of Aleppo. The point is he was part of the revolution himself. He was one of the participants. He considers himself the subject as well of the revolution. He was working in areas where rebels and other people who have the same, share the same objective and the same cause with him. And his personal dilemma was, how can I invoice the people I am part of and we have the same belief in an objective way and transfer it to other people outside the country who might not know anything about the situation in Syria, and still, like as a filmmaker or as a journalist, still feel neutral and still not project my main ideas or my points or my beliefs on the people I am working with. And he said like this is something he could identify with most of the journalists who are working, and filmmakers of course, who are working under the, like in areas that are not under the control of Assad. So they share the same cause with the people who are they working with.
بخصوص إذا بدنا نحكي عن علاقة المادة اللي بنشتغلها نحن بالسياسة، رح أحكي وجهة نظري أنا. يعني بالحقيقة أي مادة، إذا بدي أحكي عن الوثائقي يعني نحن بنحاول نشتغلها لحتى نكون مؤثرين بالناس، مؤثرين في المتابع، في المتلقي. يعني مو بنفس القدر اللي بتأثر فيه السياسة، لكن ممكن في أوقات كتير نحن منافسين نكون للسياسيين، نكون عم ننقل صورة واقع، عم ننقل صورة حقيقة، ما عم نعمل بروباغندا مثل ما بتعمل السياسة، ما عم نعمل تأثير بطريقة أو بأخرى من ناحية الأيديولوجيا، من ناحية الأفكار. لا، نحن عملنا يعني عمل الوثائقي خاصة بسوريا المفروض يكون يعني بعيد جدا عن موضوع السياسة، لأنه بالأخير أنا أعتبر القضية السورية هي قضية إنسانية أولا، ما هي قضية سياسية. السياسة حاليا عم تلعب في سوريا بس مهمتنا نحن كصحفيين وكصناع أفلام وكناس بنشتغل في الميديا إنه نكون على ما في نفس الصف أكيد مع السياسة، لا، نكون عم ننافس السياسة بالتأثير على الناس.
As for the relationship between documentary filmmaking, journalism, and politics, or in this very specific context like filmmaking, the main goal is to have an influence or impact on the audience who are going to see the material. And this puts filmmakers now in Syria on a very competitive position with politicians. Dirar is trying to say his own point of view that filmmakers should not be classified on the same way, or like should not come into comparison with politicians, because politicians have their own propagandas, they try to inject their own ideology and so on, while filmmakers, documentary filmmakers are trying just to present reality as it is. So the comparison here is not fair, and he does not want to be kind of compared as to a politician. He thinks that the Syrian case is a humanistic case in the first place, but unfortunately politics is taking a very big part of it right now in the worst shape possible.
Thank you. Let me get some other folks involved for now. Nicole, you haven't said anything yet. Do you have something to add to this conversation? Do you think there is something called a reality to be filmed?
I mean, I think when I'm a photojournalist, so much of what I do is still photography, and but this film, 7 Days in Syria in particular, was a partnership between myself and Janine De Giovanni. I don't know who saw the film, but she was kind of the main narrator of our journey into Syria, and the several days, actually stayed much longer than that in Syria, documenting in particular what was happening to the civilians. And I think that with anything in journalism, we cannot be, I don't agree with the term of being objective, because you cannot be. Your presence obviously affects the situation, no matter what you do to try to remain invisible. But also trying to portray the reality was equally important to us as journalists, but in this case, documentarians, I suppose, which we're not used to. I think that what we tried to do was just plainly represent vignettes of people's everyday lives there, trying to queue for bread, or the man who was running the bakery who serviced thousands of people in several neighborhoods but was continuously threatened from many different militia groups for feeding people, and tried as much as possible to portray the regular people who had to normalize war to go about their lives, which was the most difficult part, because how do you, obviously the film ended up showing the actual battles and some, fighting, but a lot of war is actually quite quiet. It's lived very quietly by the civilians who are unnoticed. They go unnoticed many times. They try to open their shops. They try to continue their lives as much as possible, and try to make money and try to go shopping for food when it's available. So we did try to put this on the screen. But I felt that even as a still photographer and with the film that we made, the more realistic you portrayed things, the less people wanted to hear and less people wanted to pay attention, especially the politicians. And I think that the more real that you made things, the less political impact it actually had. I think that so much of the material coming out of Syria, whether it's documentary films or photography or personal essays and things, are in a way shouting into the dark a lot of times. It feels very hopeless, but yet it contributes to a lot of awareness amongst the public, which is what we hope for. But in the end, who makes the decisions is the politicians. So therefore, I think that there is impact, but on a very low level where there cannot be a kind of a transportation or a sort of movement towards changing the situation on the ground.
Charlotte, do you have something to add here? Because you talked a bit about the impact of your film. In part, the participants themselves felt empowered and are now going to present in London. But also you mentioned the impact of the film, say it was on CNN, in a broader global discourse. And I wonder whether you ultimately want to say that awareness is the same thing as impact, or what's the relationship, if you could tease out a little bit more in your own experience, between making people aware of something and having an impact?
Well, I lived in a hotel with Janine Giovanni for about 3 years in Sarajevo. And which really brings me to awareness. What you've done is remarkable, and it's absolutely vital that these everyday stories come out. And you may feel that perhaps it isn't, I don't know, but it really is. What you did is quite extraordinary. And it is absolutely key to remind people in the greater world that everybody is there getting on with their everyday life. And the way Janine made her career in Sarajevo, and the way I made my career as well, was really not necessarily writing about what was happening, what they used to call the first front line, but actually going about 300 yards behind it to where the people were queuing for bread and water and trying to make pigeon risotto from a pigeon that they'd shot earlier that day with a lead pellet that they'd made from some pipes that they'd melted down using wood they'd taken from a stair from a house that had been shelled in order to create the fire. That sort of struggle to maintain a normal human existence in the face of chaos, and I'm sure in Aleppo you know about this only too well, is really what war is the reality of war. And it is completely vital that people are aware of it. And the difference between Syria and Bosnia really is that in Bosnia it was really heavily covered, very, very heavily covered. I mean, at one point there were 17 BBC correspondents in Bosnia. There were so many that we thought they were going to set up their own republic and secede. And Syria is very uncovered for several reasons. One is it's very, very dangerous, and more dangerous than Bosnia. But secondly, the brutal economics of the situation is that the media industry has collapsed financially. And when Janine and I were young and in Bosnia, frankly, we were quite well paid. And nobody's paying anybody to go to Syria now. It's very, very, very badly paid. And also the newspapers and TV companies themselves don't have the money to put behind the operation. Now, so they can't afford it, which is why the citizen journalists are so vital, because although the trouble with citizen journalism is it's always going to be one-sided, at least it's something, at least it's information. I mean, somebody can then kind of, work out whether it's right or not afterwards, but it's there. So this body of work of maintaining the fact that of what people are actually doing and actually thinking, this really is the first draft of history. And it is completely important that it's out there. And it's a shame that there's much less of it from Syria than there has been from other wars. And I think that one of the reasons why the paralysis, complete paralysis, embarrassing, shameful paralysis of the international community in working out what to do about Syria, part of the problem is that they have a lack of information about what's actually happening in the country, which you really couldn't say about the wars in Yugoslavia, where they were inundated with information.
AlHakam, do you think that the problem is a lack of information coming out about Syria?
It could be a lack of investment in knowing about what's going on. There's indeed, like Charlotte rightly said, information coming out from more citizen journalists than others. Although now we have seen also, like with the evolvement of it, into the more formalized, rather than, it is still quite grassroots, but there's a bit of more ownership now in the sense that it's revolutionary groups, people who have made their life jobs to do this kind of stuff, rather than before people who all of a sudden found themselves in the middle of it. There's a bit of effort by those now, for example, who are investing more into telling a narrative to the outside world. And you find groups such as the Free Syrian Translators, who think there's a lot of information coming out, but it's largely in Arabic, and that needs to be translated and subtitled into English. But as long as it's not maybe funded, you will not find so much known. And I would agree with Charlotte that, yes, there should be more told about Syria.
I have another question that really is more for AlHakam and for Dirar, but anybody can feel free to answer it. There has been a great deal of debate within the Syrian film community about how much violence to portray. Some, like the film collective Abu Nadara, arguing that those who depict graphic scenes of violence are participating in a pornography of suffering that needs to be disavowed. They argue that graphic displays of violence deprive Syrians of their agency and generate pity rather than solidarity. Others claim that there's a danger in the repetition of scenes of brutality, banalizing them in ways that inure audiences from seeing their horrific effects because people become habituated to them. What are your views on depicting the horrors of war in particular?
I hope Dirar could.
بس فاتني شوي من الترجمة.
I am trying.
Yeah.
So why don't you start?
Okay. It's a very difficult question, of course, and sometimes not reporting the graphic scenes or hiding or turning a blind eye is quite equal to not acknowledging what happened. Also, there's the question of whether this is used as propaganda or as spreading. Sometimes you need to tell the story, right? You need to make the story very well known. So the question is whether this is done for that purpose or whether it's for mere non-propaganda, none for complete public publishing, but rather documenting for human rights groups, documenting certain violations. So their film is very important, but whether it's used in published films, that's another question. I do agree that sometimes you need to intervene into like how much you use of that graphic footage. You need to kind of tell the idea, get it across in somewhat different ways sometimes, in order not to kill its meaning and value and make it just the mainstream.
What about the aestheticization of violence? So I think about the debate, particularly between the Abu Nadara collective, say, and Yassin Haj Saleh, or Osama Muhammad's film, for example, which some people understand as being just too grotesque.
So yeah, Abu Nadara and Yassin Haj Saleh, but Osama Muhammad, could you?
I can.
Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen this film, for Osama Muhammad, and I met him in Istanbul in a film festival, and
He's dear to my heart, by the way. So it's just you can
okay,
say
so
whatever you want, but
I should take it easy on him.
you can say whatever you want, and I just say I
Yeah.
do have a position.
Exactly. Well, he has a very interesting take on it, and I remember him saying it in the film, and we had the discussion afterwards that this what is happening now in Syria and the normalization people have reached of accepting terror and violence and death in general has created a new movement in cinema in general. He believes what is happening now and all these short clips taken by a mobile phone secretly, or these clips that are taken intentionally while interrogating somebody in a prison or torturing a person or killing a person is something cinema has never witnessed before. And he thinks, what he said was he does not think this is documentary anymore. It went one stage further than just being documenting what's happening. It's going towards just a new form, new cinematic form. Now I have to say personally, after watching his film, I was depressed for 2 weeks straight. Yeah. I could not really look at people, people on their eyes after all, because the people who were in the subjects of the film are people I might had dinner with, or we might have taken the same public transportation one day. And by this, I don't mean only the victim. I mean the victim and the perpetrator. So that idea was really, really disturbing. I could not really sleep well. So I don't know, I would say there should be a limit to portraying such amount of graphic images. The film is almost 2 hours. Okay, maybe I could accept a scene or two, then the message is there, but putting that much of violence is kind of disturbing.
I think there really has to be a balance that needs to be struck, especially working in the media and the foreign media particularly. I had instances where, or even footage and photographs of very, very graphic, brutality, violence. People, you very quickly realize how fragile human beings are when you're photographing them in a hospital being ripped apart by shrapnel and bullets and such. And the experiences of working in Syria in particular was quite difficult because of how violent things were. You yourself couldn't actually filter what should be shown and what maybe shouldn't have been shown. You just thought that it had to get out there no matter what. And you had this tunnel vision where you couldn't see from an audience's perspective of maybe it's a little bit too graphic. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the editors who were sitting in their ivory towers in New York were able to give you this kind of filter through which they thought, maybe this was not appropriate or this was appropriate. I photographed a lot of aerial bombardments in which children were killed, and showing photographs of children naked and torn apart. And those photographs didn't get run. And this is a very long history in the media of showing, what we do in war. Many problems in Iraq and Afghanistan with U.S. troops not being shown if they were injured or killed. In the same way, the Western media tends to kind of treat different countries or different people in different ways. But I think with the violence in Syria, And I've been a guilty party to this too, where we only show the horror. And actually, when I was saying before, people's lives go on. And they do still, Syrians are notorious for their sense of humor. They still in the kitchens laugh and they still tell jokes. And I think these were the pictures that didn't make it out because people had this already preconceived notion of what war looked like. And therefore, they didn't want to throw a picture of someone laughing, even in a bad situation, into the fray because it would really confuse their idea of what conflict is supposed to look like. So I think that, showing only the horror, which is what sells, and having to make it a kind of beautiful aesthetic horror for people to accept it is really one of the downfalls of the media. So, and also of the audience who consumes it, because they don't want to see something too graphic, yet they want to see something that's aesthetically pleasing and that, I guess, consolidates their idea of what conflict looks like.
أنا بالنسبة لقصة العنف أنا برأيي المشكلة يعني ما هي بشكل أساسي بجرعة العنف اللي ممكن تتضمن المادة الفيلمية. أنا إذا بدي أحكي عن نفسي كحدا بشتغل بصناعة الأفلام أو بالصحافة، أنا مجبر إني أنقل هذا العنف، لأنه عنف موجود بطريقة أكثر بكتير مما نحن عم نشوفها في التلفزيون. في مشاهد كتير المحطات في عندها سياسات عرض، الممكن اللي بيشتغلوا الأفلام الوثائقية عندهم حد معين كمان ما بيقدروا يعرضوا أكثر منه للجمهور من ناحية العنف ومشاهد الدم ومشاهد الأشلاء. الحقيقة هي المشكلة فعلا بالواقع اللي نحن عم نعيشه بقدر العنف الكبير اللي هو فوق خيال أي إنسان. يعني ما سبق أنا شفت بأي فيلم هوليودي أو أي فيلم أجنبي كمية دماء وكمية عنف وأشلاء بشرية مثل الحقيقة اللي عم بتصير في سوريا. فبشكل طبيعي هذا الشيء لازم يشوفوه الناس، لكن مو لدرجة أنا تصير هالمشاهد هي وهالمادة العنفية هي اللي بدي أحطها في مادتي الفيلمية تصير هي أنا نقطة ارتكازي لحتى أثر على الجمهور. لا، بالآخر أنا بدي أتعامل مع عقل المتلقي وليس مع عاطفته، لكن في واقع لازم يشوفه ومو بالطريقة اللي أنا أحول مادتي كلها لمشاهد عنفية لحتى أقدر أثر على المتلقي.
Okay. So the problem is not in the amount of violence that you would see in the movie, because it's already there. And there are things that he is obliged to show, like this violence in a way. Actually, there are policies as well for all like news agencies and like for editing when you are making your own film and so on, that drops a lot of the violent scenes from your material. So basically what is happening in Syria in reality is way more than all these graphic films are trying to show. Then there was the comparison between like a Hollywood movie and the reality in Syria, and there are things he has never seen any horror or crime or like blood scenes that were portrayed in Hollywood. He have like the amount of violence you might see in the highest one of them does not come even to halfway through the reality like he witnessed or like people are witnessing in Syria on their daily basis. So he thinks like the violence should be portrayed, but it should not be the main or the central topic or the central thing in the material or in the final product, because we need to talk after all to the brain of the audience, to their intellect, not only to their emotion. And he disagrees to use that amount of graphic and violent scenes just to buy the audience emotions.
إلا بالحالة اللي بيكون حدا مادته الأساسية هو بده يعمل فيلم أو مادة فيلمية عن العنف يعني بشكل كامل، فوقتها هذا موضوعه يعني فهو حر.
The only situation he thinks it's okay to portray as much violence as possible is when your topic, you are making a film just to show violence. In this case, it's fine to show a lot of violence or to make violence as the center of the product.
Thank you very much. Let's take some questions from the audience now. Anybody? Yes, Robert.
Illustrating pain or describing it. It's actually very difficult in literature to actually communicate the idea of pain. And obviously physical violence does that. Films are one of the few ways in which you can show an immediacy of people's suffering. So on this issue of the degree of violence, how much do you think you should show, not necessarily violence, but the actual suffering, the aftermath of violence, not necessarily the shooting, but the pain and anxiety that follows? As one, as having had a fairly significant experience of violence around the world, one thing I don't find fiction movies, documentaries, or everything ever capture very effectively is pain and the rather horrifying aspect of watching somebody in pain and the embarrassing aspect of watching somebody in pain, because there's a kind of animal response, and I think it evokes a mixture of sort of, in the observer, of pity and fear and embarrassment. That's a very confusing set of emotions to experience simultaneously. So do you think you can actually portray this on film in any way, or is it impossible to actually capture that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's, I've dealt with also war veterans coming back to the United States, and but also obviously refugees. I think that I work mostly with still photography, which is very difficult to capture a psychological condition in still photography, but with film, you can do so much with it because you can ingratiate yourself with somebody for 10, 20, 30 days or even longer, and start to know them, and they can start to ignore your presence there. And through their words, but also most poignantly their silences, you can really start to understand their pain, maybe not necessarily understand it, but start to portray the psychological difficulties of dealing with trauma and violence. And there's a brilliant new film that just came out on PBS. It's called Children of Aleppo. And it was done by a great friend of mine, and he followed a family of four young children actually. Their father was a commander in one of the neighborhoods in Aleppo, who was then later taken by ISIS, and the family had to leave Aleppo and flee to Germany. And you can see the transformation of the children through this film. They were telling the story of how they lived in Syria before, and you could see just not even through the words, but their facial expressions, the way they talked about things very poetically, how they were being affected, and once they moved to Germany, starting to look at Syria and the war in a 20/20 hindsight kind of perspective. So all of those can translate the thoughts of somebody and also the trauma that they're enduring.
But aren't you talking about physical pain, not psychological pain?
Yes, and obviously there's a close connection. But physical pain is something that is obviously part of violence that is extremely difficult to capture.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you can't watch somebody being in pain for a prolonged period of time, and I think it would be completely. Presumably, this is the film that you were talking about, the very violent film that shows.
Usama's film.
Yeah, it must show people in pain for a prolonged period of time.
Definitely, yeah, it was.
And you said that you felt very depressed watching. I mean, was it just too long?
Well, actually, the depression came because Usama used very strong images that even before the conflict we were like joking about. For example, like there is this this very striking image of like an officer who stripped a guy naked to his like boxers, and he was asking him to kneel down and kiss his like military boots. And that was one of the running like images, and this is something like we used to joke about like when we were kids. And seeing it portrayed and like repeated over and over, and like you could look at this guy's face, and like you see that exactly the amount of embarrassment reached the level of that you cannot see a human face in that person at that moment, and that was quite strong.
And did they also have physical torture as well? Because that's psychological torture, isn't it? Did they show prolonged scenes of physical torture as well?
That as well, yes.
And how did that feel to watch that?
Well, I think it has different impacts on different people. Of course, it did not make me feel like I don't know, like maybe the whole situation was a little bit playing a role there. Not a little bit, playing a role there. Why? Because I was in a film festival in a foreign country with a big like auditorium with hundreds of people from all over. And I was the one who felt like, okay, like I belong to what it has been shown. So I think that had a stronger effect on me. Like I was sitting next to a journalist friend from the BBC, and I was like kind of like, what is she thinking about Syria and about those people who are being tortured, or those guys who are doing the tortures, but the torturing, because both are Syrians. You know what I mean. So like it kind of made me feel absolutely uncomfortable.
I think also something that's quite interesting, which is coming out of this conversation here, is that neither he nor I actually want to describe explicitly the things that were being done. I'm too embarrassed to ask. And you don't want to talk about it reasonably understandably.
I think it is very difficult to describe exactly. Like now I'm trying to recall how I felt, but like I cannot transform the feeling to you. It just did not feel good. You know what I mean? Like I cannot tell you like there was some pain going on the lower part of my chest, and I felt like about to throw up, but I could not do that because I would have even embarrassed myself more.
But what were you actually being shown on the film? What was actually happening?
You haven't seen the film?
No, I haven't seen it.
Okay. Well, as I said, like what was happening, there was this story running between Usama and the random girl from Syria who decided to send him a message because she knew about him as a filmmaker. She was living in Homs, and she just wanted to tell him what is happening inside the country because Usama was away. And this kind of back and forth Facebook messages developed into Usama asking her to, or she is telling him, I would like to take a camera and go and shoot. But Usama used pretty much the short clips Hakam was talking about at the beginning, which are everywhere on YouTube. Like he collected all these like moments of people getting shot, moments of people getting like tortured, moments of people getting like into physical violence with the police and so on and so forth. But some of them were really, really, really disturbing. Like.
Yeah, no, I can understand that.
The amount is huge.
And disturbing in a way that a fictional representation of it isn't. If you watch somebody like James Bond being flayed alive, or Mel Gibson, you know that it's not actually real, however realistic it may look. But something like that.
I would come back to the point Dirar made earlier, that you will never see this in any like fictional movie. Like you will never see not even half of what you would see there.
بس عن موضوع الألم والألم غير الجسدي، صح؟ اللي ممكن يظهر بالمادة الفيلمية. بعتقد ما في، يعني إذا بدي أحاول أوصل معاناة الناس غير الجسدية، ألمهم الروحي يعني بالمادة الفيلمية، خاصة إذا بدي أحكي عن قصص السوريين. ما بعتقد إنه الصحفي أو صانع الفيلم بحاجة لأي جهد أو لأي تحريض للشخصية اللي قدامه أو للإنسان اللي عم يتعامل معه كمادة للفيلم. ما هو بحاجة لأي جهد لأنه يخليه يظهر ألمه. نحن شفنا بفيلم كوين أوف سيريا مجرد إنه النساء كانوا عم بيحكوا قصصهم، كانوا عم بيغصوا وبيبكوا، وبعتقد كلياتنا تأثرنا من هذيك المشاهد. بفيلم حلب الشيخ حبوش كان عم يغني في بيته المهدم، بس خلص غني لحاله نزلت دمعته وبكي. الأطفال اللي عم يعمروا الحيط اللي انهد قبل بيوم، من الأطفال عم يعمروا حيط انهد قبل بيوم، هذا مشهد مؤلم. طفل عمره 10 سنين عم بيشتغل في العمار. عنصر الدفاع المدني طلبنا منه يحكي قصته ببساطة، يحكي قصص صارت معه، فحكى قصة بكي بكل بساطة يعني. الشاب اللي بيشتغل في موضوع العدالة الانتقالية نفس الموضوع، لما كانت حبيبته يستغرق وقت لحتى يشوفها 10 دقائق لحتى تيجي لعنده، لكن بعد ما صار في حلب مقسمة لقسمين صارت تستغرق 12 ساعة. كمان الألم عم بيطلع لحاله، مجرد انه تخلي الشخص اللي عاش التجربة في سوريا انه يحكي، هو رح يدر آلامه لوحده من دون أي جهد منك.
Yeah, so portraying pain, but not the physical one, for people in Syria is not a difficult task at all, because it's right there and it's very deep that you can notice it very, very quickly. Then Dirar was mentioning several examples of people, started with the example from your film, that when women were trying just to tell their stories to the camera, they kind of choked and started crying at some point and not being able at all to continue. The other example is from the film, The Death of Aleppo, when Sheikh Habbush, like he is the singer, was standing and singing inside his destroyed old house. At some point he could not hold it as well and he started like crying and he broke down. The kids who were building the wall that was destroyed a day before, you could see like how much psychological pain they are going through. 10-year-old kids becoming construction workers. And the guy from the transitional justice in Aleppo who was telling the story before he was able to go and see his lover, like it took half an hour just to go from one neighborhood to the other, and now it's taking like 12 hours. He has to make a huge cycle just to go and say hi to the one he loves again. Like you can feel their psychological and spiritual pain. So it's easy, according to Dirar, to portray that.
We have two questions here, one here and one in the very back.
Actually, mine is not a question. Actually, it's an observation. I wanted to say thank you to all of you, that I have seen your product in the first day of arriving to this conference, and I must say, as a Syrian being away, I was reminded very strongly to what I don't know. So your efforts were greatly appreciated in many ways, and this is one of my difficulty as well, how I could translate the pain you put actually outside, how I could filter it and work with it as a visual artist. Now, My observation that is, I really wish that is Dirar will find his way to the world, because I believe very strongly what he was trying to play with his characters. I say play, but I mean serious play. That is, he make a very beautiful piece of documentary that's really very elegantly put. And I hope that is, he will become a filmmaker and he will study filmmaking, and he will make his voice heard outside Syria. And it's a very elegant piece. Thank you for this. The same with Nicole and Janine. I was really admiring the journalistic quality coming through your pieces, though you discussed it very eloquently last time. I really wanted to meet Charlotte because I felt that you have done a miracle. Not only you have done that, actually, what I really loved the way how you approach it in terms of always there is two elements. You are talking about Syria, but from Jordan. You are talking about a Greek tragedy from a Syrian point of view. You are talking about film, but using theater. It's quite a very beautiful conversation between the two. Always there is this, you are looking at something, but actually there is something else cooking in the background. Always this kind of reminder. And I really wanted to congratulate you on this approach. And hearing you today, that is actually, it was not what was intentionally. You started something else. You started it as a different exercise, but the product of this exercise is a very fruitful and very meaningful. So this is my observation. Thank you very much for approaching it in this way, because I feel that it was quite very sensitive. We were just talking about pain and suffering. You put it in a way that it's so digestible without it being blunt. And I found that eloquency, it is a very beautiful language. So this is my observation. Thank you.
Can I respond very quickly to that? So thank you very much. And really, don't thank, it's not me, it's Euripides. There's a reason why he is a genius. And in fact, when we were talking about pain earlier, one of the things about Greek theatre is that all the violence happens off stage. It never happens on stage. Somebody comes in and goes, oh my God, they throw Astyanax off the wall. Ah! But you never actually see it happening. And when we were adapting for the movie, the Syria Trojan Women movie, which is somewhere in some ghastly sort of movie place, one of the problems that we really had with adapting it to be a feature film script was to put the violence on the screen, which you never see in Euripides. But the other thing is that by choosing a Greek play, it is a universal myth, not just because the human beings and their behavior patterns are universal, but it is a universally known myth. And one of the objections that we had faced sometimes in Britain, people said, ignorant people in fact, who should have known better, said, don't you think it's very culturally imperialistic to impose your Western myths on the Syrians? And we said, hang on a minute, Euripides isn't a Western myth, it's an Eastern Mediterranean myth. And these plays were being performed in the theatres of Palmyra, Damascus, Amman, when William, my ancestors, were wiping their bottoms on them, in Scotland. It was a fantastically ancient and cultural society with these myths as part of their history and tradition. And all the women that we work with, they came from very different backgrounds, these women. All of them knew about Troy, all of them. The educated ones knew about Homer and Euripides and the Iliad. And even the uneducated ones, Brad Pitt, they all knew about it. So the thing was to choose something that everybody could understand wherever we took it. And we would like to do this project, the Trojan Women Project, we would like to do it in other refugee communities, not just Syrian ones. We'd like to start it again in Germany and in Britain, I think. But also, frankly, you could do it with Eritreans, you could do it anywhere, because it's a completely universal story.
Nobody disputes the fact Bashar al-Assad, like his father, he's a dictator, he's a horror. He and the Russian inflicted a great deal of destruction and killing in Syria, as well as pain, as Robert said. But if you look at mass media in the West, hardly any information regarding Jabhat al-Nusra inflicting pain on other Syrian, because we support weapons for them, we support money for them, we support advisor to them. This is ignored. And I think if you as journalists and filmmaker, surely you should have some objectivity, not only see what Bashar is doing, but also the opposition, who are doing lots of pain too in Syria. Thank you.
I'm just going to approach this from what I've experienced in Syria is that I go back to the United States sometimes and I try to explain what's going on in Syria, and after about 3 minutes, people completely tune out and they have no interest in the complexities of what's going on the ground. And that is your average American public, or even, I mean, the European public tends to be a little bit more engaged and they like to read more kind of personal stories of what's going on down there. But on your average kind of person who consumes the news, they cannot digest the names of Jabhat al-Nusra, Ahrar al-Sham, and what have you, and to try to pick apart which group is fighting which and why they have these allegiances and who's taking money from where and where the weapons are coming from, who's stealing food aid. Nobody can digest those pieces of news. And as much as the journalists want to explain what's going on, to try to at least inform the public and also the politicians, and as well as the intelligence community, which sometimes has no clue what's going on, it's really, really difficult to make people to pay attention to this because it is so complicated. And how, unfortunately in 24 hours news cycle and Twitter and everything, you have to make everything into 140 characters and try to make people, or hopefully understand what you're witnessing without making them switch off. So unfortunately, it's really up to the people who want to be interested sometimes. You can write as long articles as you want because the internet has so much space, but the question is really who's willing to read it.
Well, I mean, you can't force people to read stuff. I mean, it's not just the age of Twitter. Believe me, nobody was interested in what was happening out of the Balkans 20 years ago. I mean, I remember perfectly intelligent friends of mine, highly educated, saying, yeah, the Muslims, they're the Croats, aren't they? No. And, there was a place in Bosnia called Bihać that my boss wouldn't let me go to because it was too complicated. It had seceded from some other place, and she just said, no, we're not doing that one, it's just too difficult. So you can't actually force people to read things. You can make it as interesting as possible. You can make it as visually stimulating as possible. You can make it something that they can identify with as much as possible. You actually can't make them do it.
I can wait after Dirar. Thank you.
هلا بالتأكيد نحن مؤمنين إنه الأسد مجرم وإنه داعش بنفس الوقت كمان هي تنظيم إجرامي وجبهة النصرة كذلك. لكن وصلنا في الموضوع بالمواد بخصوص سوريا أو بالأخبار المواد الإعلامية أو حتى بالمواد الفيلمية، ما بعتقد ما فينا نقارن، ما في مجال أبدا للمقارنة بين الإجرام من الأسد وإجرام المفرزات تبعه، مفرزاته اللي هي داعش واللي هي جبهة النصرة، التنظيمات المتطرفة اللي كلياتنا بنعتبرها، معظم السوريين بيعتبروها هي فعلا هي مفرزات الأسد اللي صنع الإرهاب واللي صنع الإرهابيين وبعتهم على العراق أيام دخول الأمريكيين. قدر يعمل نفس الشيء في سوريا، بيصنع داعش والأمريكيين بيعرفوا الموضوع. لكن الموضوع اللي ممكن يكون عم يغطي على الفكرة اللي حكيتها حضرتك، مثلا باللحظة نفسها اللي انقصف فيها مشفى القدس في مدينة حلب أو مشفى دار الشفاء في مدينة حلب، اللي استشهد فيه آخر طبيب أطفال في مدينة حلب، واللي انقتل فيه استشهد فيه أكثر من 25 شخص. فينا جبهة النصرة اختطفت ناشط. أنا عن نفسي نشرت الخبر وبعثته لأصدقائي وانتشر في صفحات بتوثق انتهاكات جبهة النصرة، بس هذا قصدي، ما فينا نقارن الاثنين جريمة، اثنين بالنسبة لي مدانين، بس ما بقدر أنا أحط هاي الجريمة بنفس الميزان مع هاي. في شيء ما ممكن بني آدم في العالم إنه يتخيله. في مشفى، المشفى حتى في أعتى الحروب، المشافي ودور العبادة كنائس أو جوامع هي مكان احترام وما ممكن حدا يستهدفها، لكن نظام الأسد عم يعملها. نحن على يقين ونحن متأكدين إنه جبهة النصرة وبعض التنظيمات الإسلامية المتطرفة وداعش هن أعداء absolutely، يعني أعداء للثورة. لكن فينا نقول، أنا على ثقة بكلامي، يعني فينا نقول إنه إذا نحن قدرنا نسقط نظام الأسد، إذا نحن قدرنا نخلص من نظام الأسد، بيصير كتير سهل علينا أنه نتخلص من رواسبه اللي هي التنظيمات المتطرفة من داعش ونحن نازلين.
Okay, so Dirar said that he strongly believes that Assad is a criminal, as mentioned, and his father as well before. And of course, the products that came along after the Syrian revolution turned into like an armed conflict, the products were like extremism and terrorism. And these products are Assad's products as well. The example was during the war on Iraq, the Syrian regime was willing to, not willing actually, the Syrian regime sent some people to fight there, right? And like it was facilitated, like because the borders were closed and so on. And at the same time, when the war came to Syria, when the conflict arrived to Syria, Assad himself allowed the existence of ISIS, Daesh, Al-Nusra, and other extremist groups. But what Dirar does not accept to bring two things into comparison is to compare the crimes Assad is doing, the scale of the crime Assad is doing, and the scale of crime Al-Nusra is doing, for example. There is a very specific incident he mentioned, which is the bombardment of the Al-Quds hospital in Aleppo and assassinating the very last doctor there, and the number of casualties, which were mainly kids and people who came to the hospital because they are suffering some diseases and so on. And at the same time, at the same day, Al-Nusra kidnapped a journalist. So that was happening at this, activist. That was happening at the same day. But Dirar himself reported the incident of Al-Nusra, and he shared the news with his network, and the news went public. So he condemns extremism, and he condemns their violation of the rights of the people where they are controlling, but at the same time he cannot accept to bring the comparison between these groups and Assad. That was it, right? Or did I miss anything?
Okay, yes, please.
Thank you. I think now this is a complicated one. Unlike the war itself, which can, for those keen to understand it, they can. Those keen to learn what's going on, they can. The information is quite there. But then what's complicated is what do you choose to report and focus on and how and all of that. Now, obviously, as everybody sees, nobody hasn't heard of ISIS and what they do. This was so much publicized and talked about to the extent that you have so many understanding and good people telling you, oh, these refugees, they're fleeing ISIS and Assad, or just ISIS. And this is the narrative, this is what people think. And then you ask the refugees, you ask them why did you leave? And there were even formal surveys For example, there's one done some 4 months ago in a German Syrian refugee camp in Germany. Some 900 people were asked, and the vast majority said, we are fleeing Assad. And the question is, Assad in the first place and ISIS in the second place. And another question was, what would make you go back? The answer was, if there's freedom in my country, if the Assad regime has to be toppled. But now this is easier to solve. I mean, there are so many things really important to mention here. The rebels and the revolution are against ISIS. This is well known. ISIS is against them. ISIS is their main enemy. They often felt so abandoned while they were fought ISIS. They were the only side being bombed in Syria. There was some 1 full year when the only areas that were being bombed were not the Kurdish-controlled areas, not the ISIS-controlled areas. That's before the international coalition entered, and not the regime-held areas, but the rebel-held areas, even though they were at war with ISIS. So they don't have an interest in, like those, let's say, revolution sympathizers. They feel so betrayed by ISIS that kidnapped the revolution. But now there's the question of Al-Nusra Front, for example. Al-Nusra Front, they feel the same, but I think while there is so much bravery and this fear that's allowed for people to express their disagreements with groups controlling their areas is much bigger and much more open in rebel-held areas than in regime-held areas. In regime-held areas, nobody can criticize. You can criticize the governor, you can criticize the Minister of Electricity, you can criticize the Minister of Water Resources, the governor, the municipality leader. You can never criticize the army. You can never criticize the Assad himself. While you can, take the example of Ma'arit and Nu'man town. It has been day number 79 or 80. For every day in the last 3 months, they've been going out and protesting against Al-Nusra Front. Al-Nusra Front co-controls this town. So those who disagree with Nusra have been actively, and this is being reported by the revolutionaries, if you may say. Where would I agree with you, though? They do, while they bring to light what Al-Nusra, their disagreement with it. And again, I would agree with Dirar, the scale is hugely different. Al-Nusra does not engage in massacres, doesn't engage in mass killings. Their freedom is sometimes limited in areas where Al-Nusra has strong presence, like in Idlib city, where they co-run with Ahrar al-Sham. You still can't say your religious beliefs. You can't go to rebel-held Aleppo even. And so many people are known for drinking alcohol secretly, and sometimes not so secretly. But there was the story of some a well-known activist who liked raki, and then in appreciation, the Free Syrian Army fighter gave him that as a gift. But you can't talk about it much. You could be arrested anytime and tried in their Sharia councils. But again, the scale is quite different. So talking from within Syria, I would say, it's not 100% open. Of course, you are afraid of talking against Al-Nusra Front, but maybe if we make it about this is happening here and this is happening here, we are kind of missing the bigger picture, which is the scale is hugely different of who is committing atrocities.
Now, because we've run over time, we started a little late, so we went over a bit too, but our next panel is scheduled to begin at 4:30. I want to give you guys the chance to grab a cup of coffee and refresh yourselves. That's the next panel. That's, I was just the moderator here. So please join me in thanking everyone for participating in this extraordinary panel.